Welcome, dear friend. You have found your way here, and that is enough. Let yourself settle now, wherever you are lying, and feel the weight of the day begin to leave you. Let your body sink a little deeper into the softness beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw go loose, and let a long, slow breath leave your body, and take with it whatever you no longer need to carry tonight. And as you drift, as the quiet comes to find you, you will gently come to understand something about the ancient wisdom of Zen, about the small stories that have been quietly healing souls for centuries, and you do not need to concentrate on any of it. You can simply let the words wash over you like warm water, and let the understanding arrive on its own, softly, the way sleep itself arrives. So let your eyes stay closed, let the room hold you, and let us begin. There is an old image at the heart of Zen practice, one that has been used for a very long time to help people understand what stillness really is. It is the image of a pond, a still pond, deep in the forest, on a morning when there is no wind. The surface of the water is so calm that it reflects everything perfectly. The trees, the sky, the first pale light of dawn. And when you look at a pond like that, you understand something without needing to be told. You understand that the stillness of the water is not empty. It is full. It holds the whole world in its reflection, gently, without effort, without trying. This is what the old Zen teachers were always pointing toward. Not emptiness, not blankness, but a kind of deep, quiet fullness. The kind that comes when the mind stops running and simply rests. And the stories they used to share this understanding were never loud. They were never dramatic or complicated. They were small. They were simple. They arrived softly, the way a leaf arrives on the surface of that still pond, touching the water so gently that the reflection barely shivers. The first of these stories begins with a student, a young person who had walked a very long way to find a teacher. The journey had been tiring. The path had wound through hills and through forests, and by the time the student arrived at the small house at the edge of the mountain, there was a particular kind of weariness in them. Not just the weariness of the body, though the body was tired too. It was a deeper weariness, the weariness of a mind that had been searching for a very long time and had not yet found what it was looking for. The teacher was outside, tending a small garden. There were no grand robes, no ceremony. Just an older person, kneeling in the earth, moving slowly among the plants with the patient attention of someone who has nowhere else they need to be. The student bowed and said, "I have come to learn everything." The teacher looked up, and the look was gentle. "Come inside," the teacher said. "I will make tea." And so they went inside, and the teacher began to prepare the tea, moving slowly, quietly, filling the kettle, setting it over the heat, arranging 2 small cups on a plain wooden tray. The student watched, and there was a kind of restlessness in the watching. The student had expected something different, something more, perhaps a great opening question, perhaps a test. Instead, there was just the soft sound of water beginning to warm, the quiet of the room, the smell of the wood and the earth that clung to the teacher's clothes. When the water was ready, the teacher poured it into the pot and let it steep, and then poured the tea into the student's cup, and then kept pouring. The tea reached the brim, and the teacher kept pouring, and the tea began to spill over the edge of the cup, onto the tray, and the student said, "Stop, stop, the cup is full. It cannot hold any more." And the teacher set down the kettle and looked at the student with that same gentle look and said simply, "Yes." Just so. The student did not understand. Not then. Understanding arrived later, slowly, the way warmth spreads through the hands when you hold a cup of tea. The understanding was this: a mind that is already full of its own certainties, its own conclusions, its own noise, cannot receive anything new. Not because new things are not being offered, but because there is no room. The cup is already full. The tea spills. And so the very first teaching was not a teaching at all. It was an invitation to become a little more empty, a little more open, to hold whatever you think you already know a little more lightly, so that something softer, something truer, might find its way in. You can feel that now if you like, the sense of something loosening. You have carried a great deal today, a great deal this week, perhaps a great deal for much longer than a week. And here, in the dark, in the quiet, You can let the cup begin to empty a little. You do not need to hold it all so tightly. You can let the hands go soft. Let the mind go soft. Let whatever you have been gripping begin, slowly, to release. There is another story, one that has always felt to me like a story about water. A student came to a teacher and said, "I feel as though I am always being carried away by my thoughts. I try to be still, but the thoughts keep coming, one after another, and I cannot seem to stop them. What should I do?" And the teacher was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Sit by the river." That was all. Sit by the river. The student went and sat by the river. A real river, a slow, wide river, that moved through a valley not far from the teacher's house. And at first the student did exactly what the student always did. Watched the river and thought about it. Compared it to other rivers, wondered what it meant, tried to figure out what the teacher had intended. The mind was busy, the way it always was, turning everything into a problem to be solved. But the river kept moving, quietly, persistently, without any interest in being thought about. The water moved over the stones, and the light moved on the surface of the water, and the reeds at the bank stirred very slowly in a breath of air that came and went so gently it barely disturbed anything. And after a while, the student stopped thinking about the river and simply watched it, and then, even more slowly, stopped watching it in the usual way and simply sat with it. And the thoughts that had felt so urgent began to feel less so. They were still there, arriving and passing, the way the water arrived and passed, the way pieces of light arrived on the surface and moved on. But they were not the student, they were just what was moving through. This is something the Zen teachers have always known. Something that seems very simple, and yet takes a long time to really feel. The thoughts are not you. The thoughts are the river, and you are the one sitting on the bank. You are the one who can watch them come and watch them go without being swept away. And lying here, now, you can feel this a little. Your thoughts are still arriving, perhaps. They may be slow now, or they may still have some of the day's energy in them, still turning things over, still reaching for something. That is all right. Let them come, let them pass. You do not need to follow them anywhere. You do not need to resolve anything tonight. The river moves by itself. You can simply rest on the bank, warm and still and unhurried, and let the water carry everything away on its own. Let a slow breath move through you. Let the body grow a little heavier. Let the pillow hold your head a little more completely. The stories go on, one after another, like stepping stones across a quiet stream, and each one is small, each one is simple, and each one, if you let it, touches something underneath the usual noise of things, something that was already there, waiting, the way warmth is already present in the earth beneath the snow, waiting for the season to turn. There is a story about a monk who was asked, "What happens after we die?" And the monk said, "I do not know." The person who had asked was surprised. "But you are a monk," they said. "You have studied for many years. Surely you must have some understanding." And the monk said, "Yes, but I am not yet dead." This is one of the things that the Zen tradition has always done gently and persistently. It returns you to what is actually here, right now, in this moment. Not because the other questions are unimportant, but because they live in the mind as abstractions, as movements away from the present, and the present is the only place where anything real can ever actually be touched. Right now, the weight of your body on the bed is real. The warmth beneath the blanket is real. The soft darkness behind your eyes is real. The slow movement of your breath is real. This is all here. This is all happening, quietly, without effort, without your having to do anything at all. Your heart is beating, your breath is moving, your body is doing its quiet work of rest, and all you need to do is let it. There is something very freeing about that, when you let yourself feel it. The enormous amount that is simply happening, gently, without your direction. The body breathing, the blood moving, the mind slowly, mercifully, beginning to release its grip on the day. Another story. A teacher and a student were walking together through a forest. The student was full of questions, as students often are, turning things over and over, wanting to understand, wanting to get it right. And they had been walking for a while when the teacher stopped and pointed up into the trees. "Do you hear that?" the teacher asked. The student listened. "Yes," the student said. "A bird." and then the teacher pointed toward the path ahead, where a small stream crossed their way. "Do you hear that?" The student listened again. "Yes," the student said. "The water." And the teacher nodded and smiled and said, "There, that is it. That is the whole of it." And the student stood for a moment in the forest, with the birds singing somewhere in the canopy above, and the water moving over the stones of the stream ahead, and something very quiet shifted. Not an understanding that could be put into words. Something more like the feeling, just before you put something down, that you have been carrying for a long time. The moment when the hands begin to open. The moment when the weight begins to lift. To simply hear the bird. To simply hear the water. To be so completely here that there is no distance between you and the sound. No layer of thought or interpretation or effort. Just the sound. Just this. Just now. There is a kind of rest in that. A very deep rest. That goes all the way down through the layers of thinking and remembering and planning and worrying that we carry through most of our days. Below all of that, there is something that has always been still. Something that has always been here. The Zen teachers called it by different names, or sometimes by no name at all, because the moment you give it a name, it starts to sound like a thing you have to find, a destination you have to travel to, and it is not that. It is much closer than that. It is as close as your own breathing. As close as the weight of your hands resting on the blanket, right now. As close as the quiet. Another story. A student was meditating for many hours each day, sitting very still, trying very hard to reach some kind of enlightenment, or peace, or understanding. And the teacher watched this for a while, and then one day sat down beside the student and picked up a small roof tile and began to rub it against a stone, slowly, rhythmically, the soft scraping sound filling the quiet of the room. The student opened one eye and looked at the teacher. "What are you doing?" the student asked. "I am polishing this tile," the teacher said, "to make a mirror." "But," the student said, "you cannot make a mirror from a tile. A tile is a tile." And the teacher looked at the student gently and said, "Just so. And you cannot reach stillness by sitting very hard." This is one of the things that takes the longest to understand, and it is perhaps one of the most important. Stillness cannot be achieved by effort. Peace cannot be forced into being. The trying, the straining, the gripping, the clenching, the wanting to get it right, these things are not the path to rest. They are the things that keep rest at a little distance, just out of reach. Real stillness comes when the effort softens, when the trying loosens, when the hands that have been gripping finally, gently, begin to open. Not because you forced them open, but because you remembered, for just a moment, that it was always safe to let go. And you are letting go right now, a little, with every slow breath, with every heaviness settling deeper into the bed, with every thought that drifts through and keeps drifting, all the way through and out, without you needing to follow it anywhere. You are doing it already. You have been doing it since the moment you lay down, since the moment you allowed yourself to be still and let the quiet come. The stillness is not something you are working toward. You are already inside it. You are already resting in the very thing you were looking for. Let that land softly. Let that be a comfort. The stories keep coming, gentle and slow, like lanterns along a dim path, each one casting just enough light to take the next small step, and the step after that, and none of them demanding that you hurry, or that you understand everything, or that you arrive anywhere in particular. The path winds through quiet places, through early mornings and still water and the spaces between words, through old gardens and simple rooms and the sound of rain on a roof, through moments when someone looked up from what they were doing and suddenly, without any announcement, something shifted. There is a story about a monk who swept the garden every morning for many years. The garden was beautiful, carefully raked gravel, old stones, a few slow-growing trees whose shapes had been shaped by time and weather into something both strange and deeply peaceful. And every morning the monk would rise before the light had fully come, and take the broom, and move through the garden with slow, unhurried care, sweeping the leaves from the gravel, smoothing the paths. One morning, a visitor watched the monk sweeping and said, "The garden is already clean. Why do you sweep?" And the monk kept sweeping, slowly, and said, "I do not sweep to clean the garden." The visitor waited for more, But no more came. Only the soft sound of the broom moving over the gravel, again and again, slow and regular as breathing. The visitor stood for a while watching, and the watching was quiet, and the garden was quiet, and the sound of the broom was quiet, and something in the chest began to soften, very slightly, without any reason that could be given a name. By the time the visitor turned to go, something had been left behind, some layer of tightness, some small knot that had been there so long it had been forgotten. The monk swept the garden every morning not to clean it, but because the sweeping itself was the whole of what it was. The slow movement of the hands, the quiet attention of the eyes, the particular quality of presence that comes when you are doing one simple thing, completely, without the mind running ahead to the next thing or back to the last. There is a word for this, a soft word, but we do not need to hold on to it. We can just feel the thing it points toward. The feeling of a task done so slowly and so completely that the distinction between the person doing it and the thing being done begins, very gently, to dissolve. The sweeping happens, the breathing happens, the mourning happens, and all of it is one quiet unfolding, seamless and slow and soft. You can feel the edges of that now, perhaps, the edges of the self beginning to go a little soft and undefined, the boundary between where you end and where the bed begins, where you end and where the room begins, a little less sharp than it was when you lay down. This is the beginning of what sleep does. This is the direction you are already moving, slowly, gently, without any effort at all. Let the jaw soften a little more. Let the hands be completely still. There was a teacher who was very old, who had been teaching for so many decades that the teaching had long since stopped being something that happened at particular times and had simply become the way the teacher moved through the world. Students would come, and the teacher would not always say very much. Sometimes the teaching was a look. Sometimes it was the way the teacher poured water from a jug, slowly, without spilling. Sometimes it was simply the quality of stillness in the room when the teacher was present, a stillness so deep and so complete that visitors often felt it before they had said a word, before anything had been offered or exchanged. Just walking through the door and finding that the room was somehow different from the outside world, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of sound. A student once asked this teacher, "How do I find peace?" And the teacher sat for a moment in that deep quiet and then said, "Stop looking." The student was not sure what to do with this. Stop looking seemed both too simple and somehow too large to hold all at once. But later, much later, lying somewhere quiet and still, the way you are lying now, the student began to feel what it pointed toward. The searching itself, the reaching, the leaning forward into the future looking for the thing that would finally make everything all right. This was the very movement that kept peace at arm's length. Because peace was not ahead. It was not waiting at the end of some effort or some achievement. It was here. It had always been here. The looking was the thing that made it hard to see. And here, in this dark and gentle room, there is nothing to look for. The looking can stop. The reaching can stop. The turning over of things can stop, quietly, the way a fire stops when it has finished with all it needs to finish with, settling into warm embers, soft and dim and still. You do not need to find anything tonight. You do not need to understand anything tonight. You only need to let the body be heavy, and let the breath be slow, and let the thoughts move through like water moving through, touching nothing, changing nothing, and keep moving, all the way through and out into the quiet dark beyond. The stories continue, each one a small lamp in the soft dark, each one a little warmer and more distant than the last. There was once a gardener who tended a small plot of earth at the edge of a village, and this gardener had worked the same ground for so many years that the soil had come to know the particular weight of those hands, and the hands had come to know the particular give and resistance of that soil. And somewhere in the long, slow accumulation of all those seasons, the line between tending and being tended had grown very thin indeed. People in the village would sometimes stop and watch the gardener work, not because anything remarkable was happening. The work was very ordinary, planting and pressing the earth gently down, and carrying water in a low, unhurried rhythm from one place to another. But there was something about the way it was done that made the watching feel like rest, as if the gardener's slowness was contagious in the very best way. as if simply being near that quality of attention allowed something in the watcher to exhale, very slowly, something that had perhaps been held a long time without the watcher knowing it was being held. A child from the village asked the gardener once, "Do you love the garden?" The gardener paused and looked at the earth and at the hands, and then said, very gently, "I am not sure that I and the garden are quite separate enough for love to be the right word." The child did not fully understand this, and the gardener did not explain it further. Some things are better left as a small, quiet seed in the mind, something that needs no light and no watering, that will simply open in its own time, the way things do when they are not hurried. And perhaps you can feel that now. Some small thing loosening in the chest, some quiet understanding that doesn't need to be put into words, that arrives not as a thought but as a feeling, soft and unhurried. The way warmth arrives when you have been sitting in a warm room long enough that the warmth is no longer something you notice, because it has simply become the whole of what is. Let the hands be heavy. Let the shoulders fall a little further into the bed. There is a teaching that comes not from a monastery or a mountain or a famous teacher, but from the quality of rain, the way rain falls without preference, softly on the roof of the grand house, and softly on the roof of the small house, softly on the flower, and softly on the stone, softly on the person who welcomes it, and softly on the person who does not. Rain has no opinion about where it falls. It simply falls, completely, into whatever is beneath it. There was a monk who spent many years trying to cultivate what might be called evenness, not the absence of feeling, but something more like the quality of rain, the ability to be fully present to whatever was happening without leaning toward it when it was pleasant or drawing away from it when it was not. This monk would sit very still in the mornings and observe the thoughts as they moved through, and for a long time the thoughts were like weather, sometimes calm and clear, sometimes heavy and turbulent. But the monk sat still and watched, the way you might watch clouds moving across a very wide sky, without following any single cloud, without wishing the sky were different from what it was. After many years, a younger student asked, "Have you found evenness?" And the monk said, "I have found that there is nowhere to find it. There is only the watching, and the watching itself is already even." The student thought about this for a long time, about how the peace was not in some future state that the watching would eventually produce, but in the watching itself, in the simple, open, unclenching quality of turning toward whatever was present without needing it to be otherwise. And this is something you can feel right now, without effort, without practice, without any history of sitting still on cold mornings and learning patience the slow way. You can feel it simply by noticing that you are already here, already breathing, already letting the body sink, and that none of this requires anything of you except to continue, gently, doing exactly what you are already doing. The breath moves in, the breath moves out, something softens, something settles. There is a story of a painter who spent a lifetime learning to paint not the mountain, but the feeling of standing before the mountain, not the particular arrangement of rock and shadow and snow, but the quality of the self becoming very small and very quiet in the presence of something very large and very still. The painter said, near the end of a long life, that the most important thing learned in all those years of painting was not how to hold the brush, not how to mix the colors, not any of the technical knowledge that had taken so many years to accumulate. The most important thing was how to stand in front of the mountain and become empty enough to receive it, how to let go of every preconception, every previous painting, every idea of what a mountain looked like, and simply be there, open, waiting, like a still pool that reflects whatever is above it, without adding anything of its own. And the paintings that came from that emptiness were very quiet, very soft. They were not dramatic. They did not shout. People would stand before them and feel something difficult to name, a settling, a gentle dissolution of something that had been braced for too long. They would stand there, and without knowing quite how it had happened, the shoulders would have dropped, and the breathing would have slowed, and something in the chest would be a little more open than it had been when they walked in. This is what you are doing now, in your own quiet way. You are becoming empty enough to receive the rest that is waiting. You are standing before the mountain of sleep, and you are letting go of every idea about it, every effort, every attempt, and simply being here, open, very still, very soft, in the presence of something patient and large that has been waiting for you all day. Let a slow breath leave the body now. There was a tradition in a certain region of very simple evening rituals. When the light began to soften and the day began to fold inward, people would do one small thing with great care. Some would wash a single cup. Some would fold a cloth. Some would walk to the same window and stand there for a few moments, looking at whatever the evening had arranged in the sky. Not to observe anything in particular, just to mark the turning, just to stand in the threshold between the work of the day and the rest of the night, and to let the body know that one was done and the other was beginning. These small rituals were not about the thing itself, not about the cleanliness of the cup or the neatness of the folded cloth. They were about the quality of attention brought to a small, ordinary moment. The cup, washed slowly, with both hands, in warm water, the attention moving with the hands. The mind gathered, briefly, into the simple present of soap and warm water and a smooth ceramic surface. And then, when the cup was set down and the hands were dried, something in the whole system, a little softer, a little quieter, ready for the night. You have crossed your own threshold now. The day is behind you, completely. Even the evening is behind you. The room is dark and the body is still, and the slow water of sleep is already moving in around the edges of thought, the way water moves gently in around the edges of something that has been set floating. Let the thoughts float. Let them be there, and let them move, and do not try to still them or gather them or make sense of them. They are just the last movements of a mind unwinding, the way a room continues to settle and shift a little after everyone has left it, and the lights have been turned down, and the quiet has fully arrived. There was a philosopher who wrote very simply, and who said, in the gentle way of someone who had thought very deeply and come out the other side into clarity, the greatest wisdom is always the quietest. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with ceremony. It comes the way dusk comes, slowly, and without a beginning you can point to, until you look up and find that the light has changed completely, and the whole quality of the world has softened into something that asks nothing of you. This philosopher had spent many years in the company of very loud ideas before finding the quiet ones, had spent years accumulating and then, gradually, letting go. And it was the letting go, not the accumulating, that had led to the thing most resembling peace. Each thing released made a little more room. Each certainty loosened made the world a little more spacious, until finally there was just the philosopher and the evening and a cup of something warm and the feeling of being very small in a very large and essentially gentle universe, and finding that smallness not frightening but restful, profoundly, deeply restful, like being a single thread in a great soft cloth that holds everything. You are a thread in that cloth tonight, and the cloth is warm, and it is everywhere, and it holds you without effort, the way the bed holds you without effort, the way the dark holds you without effort, the way sleep is already holding you, gently, from the inside. There was a woman who lived by a river for all of her adult life, and she said that the thing she had learned from the river was patience. Not the effortful patience of waiting for something you want, gripping the waiting, watching for the thing to arrive, but the soft patience of water, the patience of something that simply continues, that does not have an opinion about obstacles but simply finds its way around them, or through them, or over time through them, wearing away slowly what cannot be moved all at once, until what seemed immovable has become smooth and small, and the water moves past it with barely a ripple. She said that she had tried for years to be more patient in the way people meant when they gave patience as advice. Holding on, enduring, outlasting. But that kind of patience had always exhausted her. It was the patience of effort, of resistance, of a self braced against time. The river taught her a different thing. Not to endure but to continue. Not to hold on but to flow. Not to grip the waiting but to be the movement itself, soft and constant, and utterly unbothered by the distance still to travel, because the river does not think about the sea. The river simply is, completely, in the place where it is, doing the only thing it knows how to do, and all the arriving happens by itself. And somewhere in hearing this, the body understands something that the mind perhaps has not quite reached yet, because the body already knows how to flow, The breath flows. The blood moves. The thoughts drift and change and move through. Not because you direct them, but because movement is simply what they do, what everything does, when it is not held too tightly. When the grip softens, when the hand opens. Let the hand open, very gently, the fingers loose, the palm resting soft against the bed. There is something that happens in the last moments before sleep, in that soft corridor between waking and dreaming, where the mind begins to release its grip on the solid world, and the solid world begins, very gently, to release its grip on the mind. Images appear that have no narrative logic, fragments of color, a face you may or may not know, a room that is both familiar and strange, a sound that has no source. And none of it is frightening. It is simply the mind beginning to dream in the language of the body, rather than the language of thought, loosening into something older and quieter and more fluid. This is the place you are moving toward now, that soft corridor, that gentle releasing. The solid world is already becoming a little less solid. The room around you is already a little more present as feeling than as fact. The ceiling above you, or what you might imagine as ceiling, is very far away and very still, and the body beneath you is very warm and very heavy and sinking, very gently, very slowly, into something like deep water, not cold, not dark in any frightening way, warm and soft and dark in the way that rest is dark, that kindness can be dark, that the space between one breath and the next is dark, held, cradled, completely safe. A teacher once described the moment of falling asleep as the greatest act of trust we perform, because in that moment the self, which spends its waking hours so busily maintaining itself, checking and protecting and narrating and interpreting, agrees, briefly and completely, to disappear, to set down every thought and every sensation and every story it has been telling about itself, and simply go. And it does this every night, has been doing this every night without hesitation, without resistance, for as long as you have been alive. The body knows how to do this. It has always known. You have always trusted it with this, even when you did not know you were trusting it. So this is not new. This is the oldest and most familiar thing. This is the place you have been more times than you have been anywhere else. This soft unraveling, this quiet dissolution, this setting down. Let the weight of the day settle into the bed and stay there. Let the thoughts that still want to move grow slower and softer, like music played at half the tempo and then half again, until the spaces between the notes are longer than the notes themselves, and the whole thing is more silence than sound, more rest than movement, more. There was an old monk in a very cold part of the world who had a practice of sitting outside on clear winter nights and looking at the stars for a long time, very still, very quiet, until the enormity of what was above made the concerns of the day feel very small and very light. Not dismissively small, not cruelly minimized, but small in the way that all things are small against the patience of the sky, and finding that smallness oddly freeing, as if the weight of the concerns had depended on them feeling very large, and in the presence of something truly large, they simply became their actual size, which was much smaller and much lighter, and could be set down without effort. The monk said that after sitting with the stars for some time, returning to the bed felt like the kindest thing imaginable. The warmth of it, the softness, the particular luxury of horizontal stillness after the long vertical day, the way the body, released from the need to hold itself upright, could simply spread its weight in every direction and let the surface beneath receive all of it without complaint. This is the body you are in right now, released from the vertical, spread into the warmth, every muscle that spent the day holding you upright, holding you together, carrying you from one place to another. All of that effort, finally, completely, released. The legs need do nothing. The arms need do nothing. The back need hold nothing. Even the face, the jaw, the small muscles around the eyes that are so rarely fully at rest, they can soften now, completely, into something like the face of deep sleep, which is the most peaceful face any person wears. Let the face be that face now, soft and still and completely at rest. And somewhere, very gently, without any announcement, the stories begin to move a little further away. Not gone, still there in the soft distance. each one a small, warm light in the dark, the gardener and the soil, the painter and the mountain, the monk and the stars, the river and its patient flowing. All of them still there, still drifting, still telling their slow, quiet truth in the way that such things do when the mind is no longer tightly focused, when the attention has become soft and wide and unheld. They are there the way dreams are almost there, just at the edge of what can be seen, warm and slow and without sharp edges, and you do not need to look at them directly. You do not need to hold on to any of them or take anything away from them. They have already given whatever they have to give, simply by being here with you, in this soft and quiet dark. The body is heavy, the breath is slow, the thoughts are moving through like slow water over smooth stone, barely disturbing the surface, touching gently and passing on, touching gently and passing on. There is nothing to understand tonight. There is nothing to remember. There is only this, the warmth and the weight and the slow breathing, and the dark that holds everything so gently, so completely, so without asking anything in return. There was a garden, somewhere, very quiet now, and a broom moving slowly over gravel, the soft rhythmic sound of it, slow and regular as breathing, slow and regular as the tide, slow and regular as the pulse of something very old and very patient, that has been here longer than thought, and will be here long after thought has rested for the night. The sound moves through the quiet like a breath, like your own breath, slow now, barely there, the body already doing what it has always known how to do, sinking, settling, releasing, going somewhere very warm and very still and very deep and soft and warm, and somewhere between the last thought and the first nothing, the mind begins to lose its edges, the way a shape drawn in warm sand loses its edges when the tide comes in very slowly, not suddenly, not with any force, just a gradual and gentle reclaiming, the line becoming less a line and more a suggestion, and then less even than that, and the sand and the water finding a kind of quiet agreement that neither of them had to work to reach. There was a woman who lived beside a river for most of her life. Not a remarkable river, not a famous one, just a river, the way most rivers are, moving along in its own quiet way through seasons and years, and the slow changing of the land around it. She had come to that place when she was young, and she had stayed, and over the long years she had developed the habit of spending some time each evening sitting near the water before sleep. She did not go there to think. She had found, over time, that thinking beside the river was not really thinking at all, that something about the constancy of the moving water made thoughts lose their urgency, lose their edges, become less like problems to solve, and more like clouds to watch, and she had stopped trying to distinguish between the two. She would simply sit and breathe, and let the water do what water does, which is to move, and to move, and to keep moving, always different and always the same, and after some time she would feel that her breath had matched itself to something, she was never sure what, perhaps the water, perhaps something slower than the water, perhaps just the quiet itself, and she would rise and go inside and sleep deeply and well. She said once, to no one in particular, that the river had never asked anything of her, not once, that it had simply been there, doing its one slow, continuous thing, and that its indifference was not coldness, but a kind of generosity, the generosity of something that does not need you to be different than you are, that continues its gentle work regardless of what you bring to the bank, regardless of what you are carrying, regardless of what has happened in your day, or your year, or your life. You could arrive at the river with a heavy heart, and it would receive you the same way it received the fallen leaves, the same way it received the first light of morning, the same way it received the rain. And she had found, over those long years, that being received that way, without condition, without expectation, had taught her something about how to receive herself. That some of the hardness she had carried, the small daily judgments, the quiet dissatisfactions, had softened over time in the way that stones in a riverbed soften over time, not disappearing, not becoming nothing, but becoming smoother, rounder, easier to live alongside, easier to hold without cutting. You can let that image settle now if you like, or you can simply let it drift past like everything else drifts past in this soft and unhurried dark. There is no need to hold it. The river carries everything gently and keeps nothing, and that is perhaps the most restful thing about it, that nothing is asked to stay, Nothing is asked to be more than it is. Everything is simply met and carried and let go. The breath is slow. The weight of the body is settled completely into the warmth beneath it, pressing down gently, the way snow settles onto a quiet field, softly, without effort, with a kind of inevitability that is not at all heavy, that is in fact the lightest possible way to arrive. There was a tradition in certain old monasteries of what was called the Great Silence. It began at a particular hour in the evening, after the final gathering of the day, and it lasted until the morning, and during those hours no words were spoken, not because words were considered harmful, not because the silence was a punishment or even a discipline exactly, but because the community had found, over generations of practice, that the silence had something to give that words could not give, and that the giving of it required only the willingness to stop, to cease the generating of sound, and to allow what was already there to become audible. What was already there was not nothing. It was the sound of breathing, the distant sound of wind in the trees outside the thick walls, the settling of the old building, its stones and timbers making their slow adjustments in the cool of the night, the sound of a fire if there was one. The particular quality of shared silence, which is different from solitary silence in a way that is hard to describe, something warmer, something that carries within it the knowledge of others breathing nearby, others resting, others releasing the day in the same quiet, simultaneous way. In that tradition, the entering of the Great Silence was understood to be a kind of practice in itself, a practice of letting the day be complete. Whatever had happened, whatever had not happened, whatever had been said or not said, or left undone, or worried over, at the beginning of the Great Silence, it was given permission to rest, not solved, not resolved, simply rested, in the way that even an unresolved thing can rest, can be set to one side with gentleness, can be allowed to exist without being examined or handled until the morning, when it would perhaps look different anyway, when the mind coming fresh from sleep would see it with a kind of spaciousness that the tired evening mind could rarely find. There is something in that for you, now, in this soft dark. The day is complete. Whatever it held, and now it is behind you, and the Great Silence is here, not imposed, not required, simply available, the way the dark is available, the way the warmth is available, the way the slow and steady movement of the breath is available, asking nothing, requiring nothing, simply here, simply opening like a door that has always been open, into a space that is warm and wide and asks you only to enter. You are already entering, have been entering for some time now. The edges of things have been softening, and the thoughts have been loosening their grip, and the body has been sinking further into its warm stillness, and all of this has been happening by itself, without effort, because this is what the body and the mind do when they are finally allowed to simply be, when the last task of the day has been completed, and the last requirement set aside, and the whole of what is asked is simply this: the breathing, the warmth, the weight, the dark. Somewhere in the teachings of a very gentle tradition, there is the idea that the deepest rest is not the absence of something, but the presence of something, not the emptying out, but the filling up, a filling with something so quiet and so fine that it cannot be named exactly, only felt. The way you can feel warmth spreading through the hands when they are held close to a low fire, not seeing the warmth, not watching it move, only noticing at some point that the cold is less, that the hands are softer, that something has arrived without your having had to go and find it. This warmth is like that, already here, already spreading, the kind that does not announce itself but is simply discovered, a little more present with each slow breath, a little more settled in the body with each passing moment, until the body itself begins to feel less like a separate thing and more like a part of the warmth, a continuation of it, as if the blanket and the bed and the air and the skin are all made of the same soft material, all part of the same gentle and enveloping thing that holds you now the way the earth holds everything that rests upon it, with a patience and a steadiness that does not require anything in return. There was a craftsman, a very old one, who spent his life making things by hand, slow, careful things, things that took days and sometimes weeks to complete, and people would ask him how he could bear the slowness of it, the long hours of quiet work for such small and gradual progress. and he would say that he had long ago stopped thinking of the slowness as something to bear, that the slowness was the thing itself, that the making was not the interruption between the beginning and the end, but was in fact the whole of it, every careful movement, every patient hour, every quiet morning of small and unhurried work. He said that this understanding had changed not only how he made things, but how he moved through everything, that eating a meal slowly was not a delay, but a whole experience, that walking to a place without hurrying was not wasted time, but full time, that the space between sleeping and waking, that long soft corridor of the night, was not merely the absence of the day, but was its own complete and inhabitable thing, rich with its own particular quality of being, available to anyone willing to stop moving through it, as though it were nothing, and simply rest within it, as though it were everything. Which is what you are doing now, resting within it, not moving through it towards something else, not holding it at arm's length while waiting for morning, simply here, in the full softness of it, in the warmth and the weight and the slow unspooling of the breath, in the place that has no tasks, in the time that asks nothing, in the dark that holds everything so gently and so completely and so without any need for you to do anything other than this, the breathing, the softening, the slow and patient letting go. The craftsman's hands, at the end of each day of making, would rest in his lap, and he would sit for a while before sleep, and he would look at his hands, not with pride, not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of quiet recognition, these hands that had done their work, that had moved carefully and patiently through the long hours, that deserved now to be still, to be simply held in the lap, without gripping anything, without being asked to carry or build or shape or reach. Just hands, just resting, just warm and still in the evening quiet. Your own hands are like that now, still. Wherever they rest, they are resting completely. No grip in them, no tension held in the fingers or the palms. Whatever they were holding today, all of it released, all of it set down, the hands open now, or softly closed, either way at rest, either way finally and completely free of the day's requirements. The face is soft, the jaw is soft, the shoulders have descended to the place where they naturally belong, when nothing is being held or anticipated, or carried. The chest rises very slowly and falls very slowly, and the whole motion of the breathing is so gentle now, so unhurried, such a small and automatic and completely effortless thing, that it is beginning to feel less like something you are doing and more like something that is simply happening, the body breathing itself, the way it always has, the way it will through the whole of this soft, dark night, without your needing to think about it, or tend to it, or be present for it in any particular way. You can go. The body knows what it is doing. It has always known. It does not need your attention to continue this slow and steady work. The breath will come and go. The warmth will remain. The dark will hold everything quietly in place. And in the morning, without effort, without planning, the light will come as it always comes, and the day will begin as it always begins, and you will have rested, deeply and well, in the way that the whole of nature rests, in the way that the fields rest under the dark sky, in the way that the river rests even as it moves, in the way that everything that is alive knows, at some level below thought, how to come back to the stillness at its center, and remain there through the long, soft, unhurried hours of the night. There was a small lamp in a window, once, in a story from a very old place, a lamp that was left burning not as a signal to anyone in particular, but simply as a habit, a quiet, gentle habit of light against the dark, the way certain kindnesses are not gestures aimed at anyone in particular, but are simply habits of warmth, simply the natural expression of a heart that has been tended carefully over a long time and has learned, without ceremony, without announcement, to offer what it has. And the lamp in the window made the night around it softer, not brighter, not louder, but softer, the way a single warm thing in a dark space does not compete with the dark, but simply offers itself as a companion to it, so that the darkness becomes not empty, but inhabited, not cold, but gently warm at its edges, and anyone passing who happened to see that small and patient light might feel, without knowing quite why, that the world was a bearable and even a welcoming place, that somewhere in the dark, someone or something was simply and quietly present, offering its warmth without condition, burning slowly, and without urgency through the night. That is the quality of this dark you are in now. Not empty, not cold. Inhabited by warmth, by the soft and patient sound of your own breathing, by the weight of the blanket and the give of the bed, and the particular and unrepeatable quiet of this moment, this breath, this slow and gentle, dissolving of everything that was once required of you, everything that was once held tightly and carefully and with such effort, all of it softening now into something more like mist, more like the last traces of warmth in a room after the fire has burned low, present still, but gently, but without edges, but in that diffuse and comfortable way that warmth has when it is no longer coming from any single source, but has simply become the quality of the air itself, the quality of the night itself, the quality of this slow and breathing moment. There is a teaching that comes from a very quiet tradition, a tradition that valued silence above almost everything, that understood silence not as the absence of something desirable, but as the presence of something rare, something that could only be entered the way you enter a shallow and very still body of water at dusk, slowly, with no sudden movements, letting yourself become part of it before you have quite decided to, finding that you are already in it before you have taken the step you thought you were preparing to take. The teachers in that tradition would sometimes say nothing for a very long time. They would sit, and the students would sit, and the silence would deepen, and the understanding would arrive not through words but through the quality of the sitting itself, through the shared and unhurried breath of everyone present, through the way the light moved slowly across the wall, and the way the shadows followed it, and the way none of it needed to be named or held or remembered, only witnessed, only allowed to pass through, as the seasons pass through a garden, leaving it changed in ways too subtle to measure and too real to doubt. And the student who had sat in that silence and let it work on them would rise at the end of the sitting feeling lighter than before, not because something had been added to them, but because something had been allowed to settle, the way silt settles in water when the water is no longer disturbed, the way the bottom of a clear pond is only visible when the surface is perfectly still and the light falls through it without obstruction, and what is revealed is not extraordinary, not spectacular, only the quiet floor of things, the simple and permanent ground that was always there beneath the movement and the turbulence and the daily stirring of the waters. That is what is happening now, in the very slow and settling way that sleep works on the mind. The silt is sinking, the water is clearing. Whatever was stirred today, whatever was churned by the movement of the hours and the needs of other people and the small pressures that accumulate without your quite noticing them, all of that is settling now, slowly and without effort, simply because the water is still, simply because you have stopped moving through it and have allowed it to become still around you. And the stillness is doing what stillness always does, which is to gently draw everything downward, gently return everything to the floor of things, gently restore the clarity that was always there and will always be there, waiting beneath the turbulence, patient and clear, and completely undamaged by everything that moves above it. Let the jaw rest a little more. Let the breath be a little slower, a little more complete, a little more willing to take its time at the bottom of the exhale before rising again. There is a story of a monk who was asked what he had learned in many long years of practice, and who said, very quietly, only that he had learned to be where he was, not to be somewhere else in his mind while his body sat in one place, not to carry the morning into the afternoon, or the afternoon into the evening, only to be where he was, which sounds so simple that it is almost embarrassing to say it, and which is in fact so rare and so difficult and so completely transforming that most people spend their whole lives approaching it without arriving, reaching toward it the way you might reach toward the horizon, which moves as you move and remains always at the same distance and can only be stood within if you stop moving entirely and let yourself simply be at the point where you already are. And that is the whole of it, really. The whole of what any of these old and quiet teachings ever say, in all their different ways, with all their different images and stories and traditions, the whole of what they circle and return to and try to find new words for, is only this: be here, not as a discipline, not with effort, not as an achievement, only as a releasing of the habit of being elsewhere, only as a letting go of the small and chronic tension of leaning always slightly forward, into the next moment, as though the next moment were somehow more real, or more valid, or more fully inhabited than this one. This one. This breath. This warmth. This particular quality of quiet that belongs only to this room, only to this hour, only to this night, that will not come again exactly as it is now, and does not need to, because it is entirely sufficient as it is, entirely whole, entirely itself, asking nothing of you, offering everything it has, which is this still and breathing dark, this weight of the blanket, this slow unfolding of the body into rest. A very old story tells of a traveler who had walked a long way, through many kinds of weather and many kinds of country, and who came at last to a small inn at the edge of a forest, and who sat down at a table near the fire, and who felt, as the warmth of the fire reached the cold that had settled into his bones, something he had almost forgotten was possible, which was the simple and uncomplicated relief of arriving, of no longer walking toward something, of being already in the place that had been, for all those cold and effortful miles, somewhere ahead in the imagination, somewhere not yet reached, somewhere requiring continued movement to attain. And the fire burned quietly, and the warmth spread slowly through him, and the sounds of the inn were soft and distant, and he found that his eyes were growing heavy in the most natural and welcome way, the way the eyes grow heavy when the body recognizes that it is safe, that it is warm, that the long effort of the day has ended, and there is nothing left to do but allow the evening to become the night, and the night to become the deep and undemanding hours of sleep. That recognition, that specific and whole-body recognition of safety, of warmth, of arrival, that is what the body knows right now. The same knowledge the traveler's body held as the fire reached his bones. Not a thought exactly, not a decision, only a slow and spreading certainty that moves through the muscles and the blood and the breath, releasing as it goes, softening as it goes, returning everything to its natural resting state, the way a hand slowly unclenches, not because you told it to, but because there is simply nothing left to hold. The tradition of Zen, if you were to hold it lightly, the way you might hold a smooth stone picked up from the bank of a quiet river, warm from the afternoon sun, fitting easily into the palm, not gripped, only rested there. That tradition says something very simple about the nature of the mind, which is that the mind already knows how to be still. It is not something to be taught to the mind. The mind has always known. What is taught, very slowly and gently and over a long time, is only how to stop interrupting that stillness, how to stop filling the silence with the next thought before the last one has finished dissolving, how to let the gap between thoughts grow a little wider each time, the way a tide pulling back from the shore leaves a little more of the wet sand visible each time it retreats, a little more of the quiet floor of things shining softly in the low light. The gaps between your thoughts are wider now than they were. You may not have noticed, but they are. The thoughts are slower, less urgent, less certain of their own importance. They are arising and dissolving the way shapes arise in the surface of still water when a single drop falls into it. Those slow and perfect rings spreading outward and then fading, not into nothing, but into the general stillness of the water, becoming the water again, indistinguishable from it, as though they had never been separate, as though the disturbance and the stillness were always the same thing, only in different phases, only at different moments in the same slow and continuous unfolding. And between each ring of thought, there is the water itself, still and clear and deep. And that water is always there, is always the larger thing, is always what remains when the rings have spread to nothing, and you are sinking into it now, not as a stone sinks, not heavily, or with any sensation of loss, but the way warmth sinks into the body, the way light sinks into a quiet room at the end of the afternoon, gently, thoroughly, without edges, becoming the very quality of the space, rather than a thing that moves through it. There was a gardener who tended a very simple garden, a garden with very few things in it, a little moss, some smooth stones arranged with no apparent system, a single small tree whose branches were bare for much of the year, and which the gardener nevertheless tended as attentively in its bare season as in its season of leaves, raking the ground beneath it, removing what did not belong, sitting sometimes for a long while simply looking at the empty branches against the pale sky, finding in that emptiness not a lack but a kind of presence, The way a room that has been carefully emptied of clutter becomes more itself, more spacious, more genuinely habitable than a room crowded with things. The gardener understood something about emptiness that is very difficult to say in words and very easy to understand in the body when the body is relaxed and the light is soft and the mind has grown slow and the breath is moving at the pace of something that has found its natural rhythm and settled into it without force, the way a river settles into its bed, the way the night settles over everything, the way sleep is settling now over you, softly, completely, without your having to do anything to help it along, without your having to prepare for it or invite it or understand it, only to allow it, only to continue this slow and patient releasing of the day, this gentle and unhurried dissolving of everything that was held, this returning of the body and the breath and the warm and quieting mind to the deep floor of stillness where everything rests. A candle in a still room. That is the kind of light that belongs to this hour. Not bright enough to read by, not bright enough to show details clearly, only enough to make the dark soft rather than complete, to give the dark a companion, a single small point of warmth that does not illuminate but only accompanies, the way certain presences accompany without speaking, without doing, simply by being in the room with you, simply by breathing the same air, simply by existing in the same quiet moment in a way that makes the quiet fuller rather than emptier, warmer rather than colder, inhabited rather than alone. You are accompanied right now by the warmth, by the breath, by the slow and patient dark that holds the room so gently and so completely, by the soft and formless understanding that is arriving not through any effort of thought, but through the very texture of this lying still, this breathing slowly, this allowing the night to be what it is, and the body to be what it is, and the mind to grow as slow and soft and undirected as it is growing now, drifting the way a single leaf drifts on the surface of a very quiet and very dark river, not going anywhere in particular, not arriving anywhere, only turning very slowly in the gentle current, catching a little of whatever faint light the night offers, resting completely on the surface of the water, carried without effort, without destination, through the long and soft and breathing dark. The river has no name in this story. The leaf has no particular shape. The dark is the soft dark of very late at night, when the world has grown entirely quiet, and the only sounds are the ones so familiar and so constant that they have long since stopped being sounds and have become instead a kind of silence made of sound. The low and barely audible breath of the night itself, the near inaudible turning of the earth through its own enormous and unhurried dark. And you are within it, not outside it, looking in, within it, part of the turning, part of the breathing, part of the long and patient unfolding of the night into itself, which is happening right now, which is always happening, which requires nothing from you, which will continue with the same unhurried certainty, whether you attend to it or not, whether you are awake or asleep, whether you are thinking or empty of thought, and which is, in that quiet and impersonal and entirely reliable way, one of the deepest and most restoring things there is to understand about the nature of the night, and of rest, and of what it means to let yourself be held by something so much larger, and so much older, and so much more patient than any single day, or any single mind, or any single effort toward sleep. Something so much larger, holding this, holding you, the weight of the blanket as a soft reminder of that holding, the warmth of the bed as another, the darkness of the closed eyes as another still, that private and particular dark behind the eyelids that is your own small night within the larger night, your own interior quiet within the great exterior quiet. Two silences nested gently inside each other, both of them deep, both of them complete, both of them asking only that you continue to rest within them without moving, without reaching, without trying to understand, without trying to hold on to anything at all, which is perhaps the quietest and most complete form of trust. Not the trust that expects something, not the trust that watches for what it has trusted to arrive, but the trust that simply releases, that lets the hands open in the dark, that lets the breath go out without immediately calling it back, that rests in the brief and beautiful pause between the breath leaving and the breath returning, that small and effortless suspension in which there is no need, no direction, no arrival, and no departure, only the warm and complete stillness of a moment that asks for nothing. There was once a student who sat with a very old teacher by the edge of a lake in the early hours of the morning, before the light had fully decided to arrive, when the surface of the water was the color of unpolished silver, and the trees along the far bank were only dark shapes, soft and without detail, the way things appear when the world has not yet remembered its own edges. The student had been carrying a question for many days, turning it over in the mind the way one turns a smooth stone in the hand, feeling its weight, feeling its familiar shape, and now, sitting in that half-light by the water, the student finally set the question down in words and offered it to the teacher. The teacher did not answer, not immediately, and not unkindly. The teacher only looked at the lake, and the student, following that gaze, looked at the lake too, and the two of them sat there in the grey and gentle pre-dawn quiet, while a small breeze moved across the surface of the water, leaving behind it a slow spreading of rings, the kind of rings that arrive without urgency and travel outward without sound, reaching the shore eventually as something so small it is barely a softening of the water against the mud, a whisper of movement, the most patient kind of arrival. The answer, when it came, was not in words. Or perhaps it was, but the words were so few and so quiet that they arrived in the student's understanding the way the rings arrived at the shore, without announcement, without force, by the most gradual and unhurried means. What the teacher said was something like this, that the question had already begun to answer itself the moment the student had been willing to sit quietly beside the lake and look at the water rather than at the question, that understanding comes not when we press toward it, but when we allow a little stillness, a little space, a little of the quality that the lake itself was demonstrating in that moment, which is the quality of simply receiving whatever arrives at the surface and letting it pass through, without grasping, without resistance, without commentary. And the student understood this, or felt something that was very close to understanding, a warmth in the chest rather than a clarity in the mind, a settling rather than an illumination, which is a truer and more lasting form of understanding than the kind that arrives with a sensation of brightness, because it does not need to be remembered or protected or revisited, because it has gone deeper than memory, because it has become a little part of the way the body breathes, and the way the hands rest open, and the way the night feels against the face, when the face has grown entirely soft and still. Let the jaw soften now, if it has not already. Let the weight of the head find the pillow completely. Because the kind of understanding that is arriving right now, in this slow and patient dark, in this warm and breathing stillness, is the same kind. Not the kind you will need to remember. The kind that simply settles into you the way warmth settles into cold hands, the way the breath settles after a long and gentle exhale, the way the body is settling right now, further and further into the bed, each small release leading to another small release, the blanket growing heavier and softer, the darkness behind the closed eyes growing deeper and more familiar, more entirely your own. There is a word in some old traditions for the quality that the lake was showing that morning. It is not a word that translates easily or neatly into any other language, because it names something that is not quite a thing and not quite an absence of a thing, but something in between, a quality of receptive quietness, of readiness without striving, of being open without being empty, of waiting without the tension that waiting usually carries. It is the quality of the bowl that holds water, not because it reaches for the water, but because it is still and open, and the water simply finds it. It is the quality of the ear, in a very quiet room, not straining to hear, only resting in its own soft openness, available to whatever might arrive. It is the quality of the mind at the very edge of sleep, which is where your mind is now, resting in its own particular and unrepeatable openness, soft and available, no longer seeking anything, no longer holding the shape of the day, only drifting in its own warmth, in its own gentle dark, in its own slow and falling away. The garden is still there, somewhere, in its particular corner of the night. The branches are still interlaced overhead, and the stillness under them is still the same specific and perfect stillness, and the air still has that quality, that warm and sheltered quality that is different from all other air, and the path still winds, and the monk still rests, and the river still finds its way, slowly, without effort, toward the sea. And you are still here, breathing, warm, held. The body is very heavy now. The mind is very far away. Let it go. Let everything go. The night holds it all. The dark holds it all. The deep and patient earth beneath holds it all, and has been holding it, and will continue to hold it, long after the last thought has finished drifting through, and the last trace of wakefulness has dissolved into the warm and utterly sufficient dark. You are safe here. You are already there. Sleep now, softly, gently, without trying, the way the lake sleeps, the way the stone rests, the way the breath arrives and departs and arrives again, slower now, and slower, and softer still, until the softer and the slower are the same as the quiet, and the quiet is the same as the night, and the night is the same as the warmth, and the warmth is the same as the rest that was always here, the rest that is always here, the rest that has no beginning and needs no end, here, now, still.